All right, it's 10:02, so we'll get started and let folks trickle in. Um, well, good morning and good afternoon to those folks on the East Coast. Um, this is our BDC Presents, our monthly webinar series on the hottest topics and best speakers of the world in the world of building decarbonization. But in all seriousness, we definitely have a lot of great speakers and wanted to jump in to kind of introduce briefly and then allow her to introduce herself when she does start to speak a little later. But today we have Amee Raval, the Policy and Research Director with the Asian Pacific Environmental Network. And she's going to be here to talk about what are the realities of extreme heat, vulnerable populations, and what are the solution sets. So we are excited to have her here today. We can move on to the next slide. Yeah, so who's BDC? BDC is a nonprofit coalition made up of energy providers, manufacturers, design and construction, the design and construction community, local government, NGOs, and just individuals that come together to collectively seek to eliminate pollution from the built environment and seek together to build healthy, safety, and affordable communities. And this all started in 2019 in an effort where a couple of folks fully outlined how to reach, these goals, right, of eliminating pollution from the built environment. They created this roadmap. We could move on to the next piece. At that time, the roadmap kind of focused on, limiting pollution. So essentially, there's a couple of goals here to highlight. Of course, there's the goal of the 2025 zero emissions building code, as well as just stopping the expansion right at no later than 2028 for commercial. And some of these goals are outlined to kind of have all cells of heat pumps and others to be zero NOx by 2030, right, with the inherent belief that all sectors, including buildings, need to be carbon neutral by at the latest 2045. And as you all know, appliances have about a 15-year lifespan, so hence why there's these goals, right? And I think one of the goals to highlight is heat pumps, right? And I think the extreme heat conversation is going to be directly connected to that. In real time, though, we've learned a lot. The organization has learned a lot since this, since they created the roadmap. So we're trying to do our best to ensure that not only are we meeting these goals, but that we're prioritizing frontline communities and being good allies and uplifting. And we will be able to talk about kind of that in a moment. But yeah, we can move on to the next piece. So yeah, roadmap goals, just to outline those really quickly, right? One of the goals is to raise awareness across the board, make sure people electrify their homes and have better value propositions as a result, aka ensuring that electrifying is a benefit to everyone. Building a sustainable market and consistent workforce, and ensuring that there's a supply chain and that we are going to have a product, and also aligning policy to meet other goals. And this is one way that we do this is by bringing awareness and kind of showing folks top speakers from around the world that are working on this issue, and we're here to have that conversation. We can go next, Lawrence. And that's that first goal, right? This is what we're doing today. And in our next webinar, right, we're going to have, this is an extreme heat series, right? I think some of y'all have participated on some of our previous presentations. Next, we're going to have Senator Dulce Rivas kind of talk about the issues of extreme heat and just leadership and her leadership. And after that, we're going to have a presentation on heat illness prevention with Cal OSHA. So definitely connecting, and that was going to probably be more along the lines of workers and potentially induction, right? Excited to hear what they're going to say. We can move on to the next slide. Thank you, Lawrence. Really quick, we're going to go over some webinar logistics. Everyone is muted. So therefore, please ask your questions via chat, and we'll ask speakers to answer at the end of the remarks. This webinar is being recorded. Members of the coalition will be able to access this recording on the website. And And don't remember all the great benefits. This is one of them. I think that's it, right, Norms? Yeah. Well, thank you all, and welcome to our BDC Presents. On that note, I'll kick it over to Amee.
Great, thank you, Jose, for just opening up. And I think my screen is sharing. So happy to dive into the presentation today. Really sort of uplifting as sort of the broader vision for advancing extreme heat strategies for all, for our organization, which I'll share a little bit more about. Really thinking my desire today is to share a little bit about our comprehensive set of strategies we're pushing and advancing and visioning to advance community resilience to climate change and what it means to thrive in the face of climate disasters alongside sort of the set of conditions our communities are experiencing. So just to give a little background, as mentioned, my name is Amee Raval. I use she, her pronouns. I'm Policy and Research Director with the Asian Pacific Environmental Network. APEN is a grassroots environmental justice organization. We specifically organize Asian American immigrant and refugee communities across a multitude of environmental justice issues that impact them with aims of advancing our vision for healthy, thriving, resilient communities. We were actually formed after the first People of Color Environmental Summit in 1991 and have been doing community work for over 25 years. A fundamental part of our work and vision is amplifying the voices of our members and really uplifting our community members as leaders and visionaries and decision makers for the programs and policies that impact their daily lives. So just to deepen a bit on our core strategies, because I do think that helps ground in sort of how we're thinking about our theory of change towards power building. As mentioned, the foundation of our work is very much uplifting community-based leadership through local organizing and leadership development, specifically with Southeast Asian refugee communities in Richmond, as well as Chinese immigrant communities in Oakland, Chinatown. This is the heart and soul of our work. We're also building political power through statewide coalitions and civic engagement, and really building up the power and visibility of Asian voters in California, where we're doing targeted voter outreach and other sort of initiatives to ensure that during election years, folks are empowered and that we're really seen for that the influence we have in our electoral politics, especially as Asian Americans are one of the fastest growing voting blocs in the state and country. And finally, we do policy advocacy, and that's at the local and state levels through legislative work in Sacramento, as well as regulatory processes at various agencies. At APEN, our vision for environmental justice asserts that all people have a right to a clean and healthy environment in which our communities can live, work, play, learn, and thrive. And so that's very important to us as the anchor and North Star with which we sort of place all of the strategies we advance. And so what does this mean and look like in a tangible sense? With roots in the civil rights movements, environmental justice is very much born out of the struggle against environmental racism. And for some folks, this might be familiar, but I did want to ground here because it's very fundamental to sort of the history of the movement work that we operate in. And environmental racism is really sort of articulating the ways that people of color and working class people are the ones living closest to and most affected by the health burdens of fossil fuels and climate pollution. This is the case in which APEN organizes, specifically in Richmond, which is depicted in the photo on the left. Our communities are living on the fence line of the Chevron refinery, which is that infrastructure in that left-hand photo and one of the largest and most polluting refineries in the state. An explosion at the refinery in 2012 sent thousands of community residents to the hospital for shortness of breath, for chest pain, headaches, sore throats. And those are the types of sort of acute crises and risks and health threats our communities face, and are often, have become accustomed to after living there for so many decades. In addition to those sort of more of acute crises, whether that's explosions or oil spills, our communities are also impacted by the chronic health impacts of breathing that pollution daily. This is also the case, I think, our environmental justice organizing being exemplified in Oakland, Chinatown as well. Our members in Oakland describe the city as a walk for pollution because Oakland is surrounded by 3 major freeways and is also in close proximity to a port in West Oakland. And that's pictured on the right-hand side. And so this sort of industrial activity, these corridors, expose residents to harmful diesel pollution and contribute to the city's high asthma rates. So that sort of is the set of existing burdens, the history and context and industrial pollution our communities have been impacted by historically. We also know the way that California as a state is being pushed to extremes, and the record heat, fire, and pollution all clearly have one thing in common: they were made worse by climate change. The convergence of these multiple impacts is the strongest signal yet that the climate crisis isn't far off from the future. In fact, it's here today and it's more intense than ever. I included some quotes in this slide that really sort of point to the ways amidst these headlines and impacts, we hear scientists say that we've lost complete control, that there isn't really a normal anymore, and that when you add these crises all together, the impact is cumulative. What I want to uplift here is that for environmental justice communities like those that APEN and our partners organize, our communities have been plagued with the burden of our polluting industries for generations. And so there's really nothing new about cumulative health burdens. This is something that our communities have had to confront daily and for a long time. But there is these added layers of risk and threats that are just sort of added components of what we have to cope and respond to. However, traditional models of crisis response are largely failing our communities and proving deeply inadequate. They're often coordinated through militarized entities like sheriff's departments. They rely upon protocols like evacuating to faraway sites. They might share alerts in only 1 to 2 languages. And some shelters might require folks to present identification to access services. And so these types of policies and examples really show, and I think for us, reveal the ways that our emergency management systems are collectively shutting out many, many folks from the support that they need. And then finally, as part of this context setting, I want to point folks to a few local headlines that are from last summer, specifically August, September of 2020. And the ways, even in the Bay Area in particular, where APEN works, we're seeing the sort of notion of cumulative impacts from climate disasters manifest. And so mid-August, the Bay Area hit record temperature highs with an unprecedented heat wave across the region. That weekend, we saw rolling power outages that actually led to a failure at a wastewater treatment plant. And that failure polluted the bay with 50,000 gallons of raw sewage, which prevented a lot of folks during this heat wave to cool off in the water because there were advisories against swimming and going to the beach. Simultaneously in Richmond, where, as I mentioned, our folks are living next to the Chevron refinery, the refinery actually had flaring that sent black smoke above the area and forced a lot of families to close their windows against the plumes of smoke. That weekend then wrapped up with the rare lightning storm that started an early wildfire season and was accompanied by a month or so of relentless poor air quality that choked the region without relief and was another sort of unprecedented moment in the state's history. And then at the end of September last year, we kind of were bombarded again with that triple whammy of smoke, heat, and smog, where fires continued to rage across Northern California. So I uplift these sort of headlines because these are the stories and lived experiences that our communities are impacted by on a daily basis. And I zoom into the Bay Area because, again, these headlines just reveal that our communities are acutely aware of the need to imminently address climate change because of these sort of very real, scary impacts that continue to intensify. So I know this picture is grim and it's a lot of sort of, the framing thus far is very sort of, I think just frames the gaps and the problems and the threats that our communities are being impacted by. But I think recognizing this context and many of these gaps we're seeing and real issues we need to address right now, what can we do to address these risks, protect the communities that are most impacted, and create opportunities to thrive? And so now I want to move us towards a bit more of a solutions-oriented frame to uplift how we're kind of addressing the problems that I just uplifted. So before I kind of go into really specifics, this graphic is from the Climate Justice Alliance, and it's a very high-level overview of what we call the Just Transition Framework. So APAN really places all of its strategies within a frame for just transition, and the strategies here really name the key elements of strategies within that vision, whether that's fighting the bad and fighting pollution, building the new and really investing in clean energy investment technologies and solutions, changing the rules, which through policy advocacy and other government sort of levers, moving the money and resources, building the bigger we, which is around coalition building, and then changing the story through narrative work. Most of the pieces I'll be uplifting really fall into building the new and changing the rules. And then the last thing I'll say is sort of again more on the current moment is we know that our solutions, in addition to thinking about just transition, which was a historic way we talked about our strategies, especially amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, we also need a just recovery in this current moment that not only grapples with climate disasters that are worsening, but simultaneously address growing economic inequality, the public health crisis, alongside racial injustice. And this image is, I think, one of hope, because amidst these multiple crisis expands our imaginations around what is possible. So we are very much in a visioning and creative mode too of thinking through these solutions in a holistic way. So the image on the left, I think, begins to paint that picture of the types of solutions we invest in. what do resilient communities that can respond to disasters, that are meaningfully engaged, that don't face threats of displacement and have safe and affordable housing, and those that have community cohesion really look like? And so I invite folks to really take a look at this image, and draw out what they see. I think some of the pieces I want to uplift are, safe streets with access to public transit and active transportation like bicycling, healthy food, and clean energy like access to solar panels and battery storage. There's pieces around water efficiency and access to clean, safe drinking water, as well as green space. And so there's a lot here that make up this broader vision for a resilient community. The thing that I'm always drawn to is the bottom right of the image, which is that people are in cohesion with each other. They're connected. Folks are looking out for each other, and those social networks and ties are so important and sometimes invisible when we talk about solutions, because they're not always as tangible when it comes to investments through the government. And that's why I like the image on the right, that it takes roots to weather the storm. And so fundamentally, our vision for resilient communities is about people power and organizing and power building, and particularly uplifting the vision of working class communities of color. So one piece of our solution has been, as a foundational element, has been around mapping and really sort of ensuring that we're targeting and prioritizing the people that are most impacted through the various solutions we push. So APEN had a report, Mapping Resilience, a blueprint for thriving in the face of climate disasters. This report really uplifted ClalEnviroScreen, if folks are familiar with. It's a cumulative health impacts tool that is used very widely in California policymaking to uplift the hotspots of places in California that are most impacted by the cumulative impacts of pollution and poverty. And it's really a tool, as named here, that prioritizes environmental justice in policymaking. And so the red areas in this map are what California identifies as disadvantaged communities. And through that geographic mapping and different policies around environmental justice and climate change are targeted and prioritized in those neighborhoods. So our Mapping Resilience report offered, various pieces across its sections around really uplifting some of the stories that I just named around the communities that are most impacted by climate change. It reviewed over 40 different mapping tools out there that were very complementary to ClalEnviroScreen. But one thing I didn't mention in the last slide is ClalEnviroScreen is a very powerful tool that we advocate for and uplift, but it's incomplete because it doesn't actually include climate change impacts. And while we continue to uphold and push ClalEnviroScreen across various policies that it's applied to, we do want additional tools to ensure we're targeting the communities that are most impacted by climate change as the state makes more and more investments in climate resilience. And so that's what our Mapping Resilience report was about. It's like in drawing from the strengths of ClalEnviroScreen, what tools are available to comprehensively look at the impacts of climate change on communities across the state. So one thing that we really recommend, just before I move on to the some of the key recommendations, we really uplift in the Mapping Resilience report that the state of California needs one sort of comprehensive framework like ClalEnviroScreen to target hotspots of climate vulnerability. And we don't have that yet in California. And I know the federal government is looking at this too, is how do we really target those hotspots and make sure communities that are most impacted by extreme heat or wildfire smoke or drought are getting the supports that they need and are first in line for protections and investments. And so that work is actually moving forward in California. Happy to share more if folks are interested. But the key piece that we uplift across any sort of mapping and targeting framework for policies is that we really have to ground truth and complement mapping with community expertise. So while data is very powerful, we should always complement those mapping tools, how they're developed, and the information that's there. We should really ground it and complement it with experiential knowledge, lived experiences and stories from community members to make sure that any mapping efforts are inclusive and participatory and aligning with what communities know they're experiencing in their neighborhoods. So that's sort of one piece I want to name that's foundational, because when I talked through some of the broader solutions, any policy measures really have to be designed to target the communities most impacted to be equitable. And so whether it's a specific technology like heat pumps or broader state programs, we always want to see that targeting mechanism so that there is a carve out for communities that need the most help. On the flip side, we know that mapping alone is not the end all of solutions. We actually need programs to target that are targeted to our communities. So what are those policies and solutions? Amidst this moment of crisis, our communities have had to be incredibly resilient, and they've been organizing for change and innovating local models for crisis response. In some places, we've seen neighbors have formed mutual aid networks. People are sharing resources with each other. Schools are providing food to families, and libraries are being turned into cooling and air respite centers. So these are just some of the solutions we're already seeing locally, despite resource constraints, people sort of creating and crafting in their own neighborhoods. And that's what the role of community resilience in a just recovery really looks like, is that people really have the vision and they know what they need, but how do we enable that at scale at the state level? So we developed a set of recommendations as the pandemic and shelter-in-place orders hit to really kind of name those, to I guess exemplify those local sort of innovations and examples. How do we scale them at the state level? And so we talked about various solutions across a multitude of dimensions, whether that be around like making equity real in state government responses. We talked about strategic investments for a green stimulus. And we also uplifted solutions around achieving economic resilience and recovery. And this letter, we was supported, and suite of recommendations was supported by over hundreds of different organizations across the state. And I named this because this letter became a blueprint for a lot of the solutions we're moving forward now in the context of extreme heat and broader community resilience. At the same time that letter came out, we had another report that we pushed forward in 2021. I'm sorry, at the end of 2020, early 2021, I think it was in January, called our Resilience Before Disaster report. And it really sort of uplifted the need to invest in social infrastructure, the services and facilities that secure the economic, health, cultural, and social well-being of the community. And so as I pointed to in that image about people together, social ties and networks being important, how do we operationalize that through government? And that's where this term social infrastructure comes from. And what does that really mean and look like? It means investments in public institutions like schools and libraries and park and rec sites, community organizations like places of worship, youth and senior centers, as well as childcare facilities, small businesses, and even the housing that our community members live in. So what came out of this report is scalable models that I've been alluding to for a bit. One of them that we're very, very excited about is community resilience hubs, which are spaces that communities gather, organize, and access social services on a daily basis, as well as during sort of these shock crisis moments where there's needs around disaster response and recovery. But what's key for us is that these facilities don't just operate during sort of heat waves alone or power outages or other crises, but are there every day to serve community needs. What do those needs look like? It could mean cooling and heating. It could mean access to electricity, Wi-Fi and charging for phones and other devices. It can mean access to food and water and other medical supplies, as well as just broader access to information and services. And so in the report, we uplift a suite of different values around resilience hubs, really sort of being developed at trusted community facilities that create openings for community governance and leadership, that create workforce development opportunities, and again, are targeting benefits to the most impacted communities. We're very excited because we actually have a local community resilience hub project that APEN is working on at the RISE Youth Center in Richmond. RISE Commons, which is the expanded building that is being developed as an expansion of the RISE Youth Center, and it's currently being constructed as we speak, it is a broader sort of vision for youth-led programming and services and power building. So youth have really like organized for this vision for RISE Commons for a long time. And APEN has been really partnering on one piece around climate resilience. And so it started off as access to solar and putting rooftop solar on the facility. But we've also expanded to now coupling the installation of solar panels with battery storage. So that in times of power outages, RISE can offer access to electricity for residents, particularly youth in Richmond. There's also discussion around air filtration and making sure with growing wildfire smoke and bad air quality days, RISE can be a safe place to breathe clean air, to get respite from smoky conditions, and serve as a clean air space as well. But beyond sort of those elements, RISE is really sort of innovative because this space is not just around some of those key climate pieces, but is a broader power building space. And folks are gonna have access to a meditative garden. Healing is a key part of how RISE Youth really envision resilience and access to trauma services and other mental health services, workforce development opportunities, small business incubators and training, as well as arts and performance and cultural development. So this project is expansive across many different sectors, many different areas that youth really want to have be part of this project. But we are really excited as APEN to provide the climate resilience pieces. So that's resilience hubs and sort of the community vision. The last piece on sort of another example that came up in our resilience before disaster report was in-home resilience. That the shared investments in shared community facilities are important and critical as part of investing in the social fabric of our communities. But that alone is not comprehensive to meeting all of our community needs, especially thinking about our elderly folks, disabled communities that are in many ways homebound. For folks that can't make it to a central facility, we also need to be investing in the housing that our communities live in, because that's generally where residents spend most of their time. So in our report, we really uplifted the role of home care workers who are really working with elderly and disabled folks, as well as folks with chronic illnesses, as needed to really check in on people where they live. And we also talk about a strong public sector workforce as it relates to more of the resilience hub framework. But I name in-home resilience because as an extension of our report, there's also a set of technologies we really want to invest in when it comes to resilient housing. So all of this work from the report on developing these concepts converged into a bill we worked on with partners, including the California Environmental Justice Alliance and the National Natural Resources Defense Council. We had a bill last year, this past year, AB 1087, that envisioned to create a new grant program to deliver and invest in resilience building services like energy efficiency and microgrids and HVAC repairs and other resilience building investments holistically, both in community facilities as well as the housing, affordable housing that our community members live in. So the vision was to accelerate the deployment of clean energy and health technologies to the places we live in, as well as where we access services. So we were really excited about this bill because in many ways it bridged those two concepts of community resilience hubs and in-home resilience into one bill and tried to put resources towards a new grant program to deliver those investments. This bill did not move forward very far. It was turned into a 2-year bill in April. So, but it did do a lot to shift the conversation around what climate resilience means, and that it's not singularly about natural resources investments or built infrastructure alone, but that there's another piece around community resilience and communities getting access to what they need where they live. So fast forward from that bill not moving forward, while we were disappointed because of that conversation that changed, we actually won at the end of last year, and so we're able to secure through budget advocacy, given a significant surplus, $100 million for a new Strategic Growth Council program to fund and resource community resilience hubs. So that was very exciting, and it wouldn't have been possible without our partners and coalition that moved that together. And so we're very excited that despite our bill not moving forward, we did win a new resilience hubs program. The program is actually called Community Resilience Centers Program, but we use those terms interchangeably. And so that was very exciting. One thing that's important to say though about this budget win is it's pretty squarely focused on community facilities and sort of shared facilities like libraries and health clinics and youth and senior centers, but isn't necessarily as targeted to housing because of sort of the way that our advocacy ended up evolving. So on the flip side, that kind of previews some remaining gaps, which is exciting because for APEN, the piece on investments in housing has a long history. So these images are actually from a community member meeting. Our leadership steering committee body meets annually. They meet monthly, but they also have an annual retreat where they vote on our annual priorities. And so one of I think this was 2 years ago, safe and affordable housing was actually something that was uplifted by our community leaders in Oakland and Richmond as a priority issue. And when I say safe and affordable housing, we turned it into a healthy homes campaign that was really about addressing issues like mold and asbestos and other remediation needs where our communities live, alongside ensuring that there is anti-displacement protections and that our communities can get investments for clean and healthy housing without being displaced. So these are just some snapshots from that work. We did pass a bill a couple of years ago that was our Healthy Homes bill that ultimately created a study around the intersections of housing affordability, energy efficiency, and public health. And that grounding, I think, previews that there's still a lot of work to do when it comes to our vision for healthy and resilient housing, that we need sort of broad investments still, and there's a gap in the state of California to enable a broad suite of upgrades and technologies, from energy and water efficient appliances to electric stoves and ventilation, mold and toxin removal, and broader smart thermostats, energy efficiency, weatherization. There's a whole set of technologies and upgrades that our communities want and need, and we need to see investment in. So finally, I think that gets to what we're looking at in 2022, which is, just continuing to implement that funding for community resilience hubs and centers, but also pushing for additional funding, given we're anticipating another surplus in California. How do we get more funding for community resilience hubs, as well as complementary funding for healthy and resilient homes? Because that's what our communities are really asking for and uplifting as the priority need when it comes to climate resilience. So I think that's it in terms of my slides. And yeah, appreciate folks staying along this journey, as I covered a lot of different areas of work and different dimensions of the sort of history of advocacy. And this is my email if folks are interested in reaching out to learn more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amee. And folks, feel free to ask questions in the chat or in the question bar. I do have one question that I'll uplift to you, Amee, from Gerard Kenny. The question is, are there any discussions taking place about commercial kitchens? For instance, the kitchens that provide school lunches pump out a lot of heat due to nature burning gas, and by and large are the biggest contribution of contamination to the air quality of the students, especially with environmental justice factors being a chief contributor to childhood rates of asthma. With that in mind, are there any efforts to decarbonize and electrify kitchens?
That's a great question. And the piece on decarbonizing kitchens, I think it could actually be, there could be further attention around, but there has been in California a lot of conversation around community kitchens and ensuring that this vision for resilience hubs includes that piece on sort of access to food, both during climate disasters, but also on a broader daily basis. So I know that the funding that the Department of Food and Agriculture is getting, CDFA, they've received $150 million to enable community resilience centers as well as fairgrounds. Community kitchens was one piece that was threaded across their proposal, and I feel will be a conversation. And when they implement that money very soon, we haven't heard anything about guidelines. I think this piece on decarbonization is actually really important.
Yeah, thank you, Amee, for that. We got another question from Sandy Doyle. And the question is there data about public health costs that could be mitigated by healthier homes?
That is a really great question. And I can send in the chat. So that our bill, AB 1232, around healthy homes, ultimately, like I said, did turn into a research study as it evolved. The concept was broader at first, but ultimately resulted concretely in a research study that really documented both the need and opportunity when it comes to linking public health investments and upgrades with in housing alongside energy efficiency and other clean energy upgrades. And so that report has been developed, and I can share it in the chat, but I think it's been a tool for us for advocacy. And I think there is a lot of research coming out that study compiles that really documents sort of the harms of living in unsafe and unhealthy housing. I think there's more to do, but I think that was a good first step, at least in California, to visibilize this issue and the great opportunity to link, if there's these weatherization upgrades happening to support energy burden, address energy burden, support energy affordability, why not also make those complementary public health upgrades and remediations simultaneously when you have that opening? I don't know, Jose, if you would add anything to that with your expertise.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds right. Thank you, Ami, for that. I think your summary and your description on kind of where the data's at, and I think, like you said, it's a good start. There's probably more to do in terms of data and how healthier homes can probably help, right? But I think you provided a great summary as to what's out there. I think on that note, there's another question related to that, and the question is, are there any health dollars being used to improve homes? Um, yeah, just curious about your thoughts on that, Alan.
That's a good question. At least in California, I beyond this study, I think this next step is actually pushing for additional funding. However, I do know the local help, at least at the state level. So I think what I'm saying is at the state level, there could be more investments. Locally, though, a lot of the local health departments do leverage public health funding for sort of some of these housing investments, inspections, and just this broader frame of healthy homes. And so I know in Contra Costa County, there's some work that the report that was just shared in the chat that actually uplifts the way the Contra Costa Health Services Department partnering with a group called Regional Asthma Management and Prevention, or RAMP, some of the partnership they did to address healthy homes. So I think that that's a good resource, and I think was a great model in some ways, like a local case study of the ways public health professionals are partnering with sort of energy efficiency delivery to pilot some of these projects. But again, that's a local case study. I think there needs to be further investment on these linkages. And it's not just public health dollars, but we're trying to leverage climate resilience funding, clean energy funding. There's a lot more resources in that realm in California from sort of our energy agencies, as well as just broader climate change efforts. I think we spent $15 billion last year on climate change. So I think we're trying to really like create space within that conversation for some of these investments. So that's what I'll say on that, but definitely more is needed. And then one more thing is federally, I heard like $3.5 billion for weatherization assistance, and so as that money comes to states, I think that's from the infrastructure bill. How do we leverage that funding but ensure that it's directed in a way that is enabling these sort of holistic upgrades?
Yeah, thank you, Ami. I think that's exactly right in terms of leveraging federal funding as it comes our way, and also looking at existing funding and how we kind of coordinate it, right, and direct it. Right, I think the coordination is key. It looks like the other questions are more comments, but I'll uplift them because I think they're cool, right? One of the comments is from Avery Coulter, sorry. And they just wanted to uplift, I think, excitement about the Rice Center because they quoted the 1024 calculations for it. So I think wanted to uplift kind of, I think, excitement there on the work y'all are doing. And then Sandy mentioned they think ACEEE might have some resources on leveraging health and energy dollars that could be helpful. So we can make that connection if desired, I think. Yeah, any more questions? It looks like the questions stopped. We got about 9 minutes, so we can maybe close if there aren't any more questions, but I also want to give folks an opportunity to see if there's anything else that comes to mind. So don't be shy, y'all. Ask your questions. We got a little bit of time. Let's see, we'll give folks a minute. Let's see if anyone else has any questions. But it's not every day we have, someone that's working on such a, big intersection here talking to us. So please take advantage, y'all, and let's collaborate our shared knowledge. Uh,
Well, I'm working closely with you, Jose, so
yeah.
you're also an expert. And that's like very important to us too, is that of course APEN's work is exciting. I spend a lot of time going through again all these like peer these like various phases and priorities across the years, but the work is not possible without our partnerships and working in coalition across diverse sectors. And so APEN brings a certain community environmental justice perspective, but we have to work with mainstream environmental organizations, public health organizations, workforce development, labor, as well as, you know, the building decarb coalition as well. So there's a whole suite of partnerships that we are in and coalitions to make this work possible. And that's partly why we have this holistic vision, because it's not one thing. Our communities aren't living sort of siloed lives. These issues are impacting them simultaneously, which is why we are trying to break silos constantly across programs, across sectors to deliver holistic investments.
Yeah, thank you, Ami, for that. And it's been great to work with you all. And I do have one more question. Um, and I think, yeah, has extreme heat been an increasing concern in communities?
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, the way I framed it in the presentation, there's um, it's multiple pieces that our communities are seeing and experiencing, but extreme heat is absolutely one of them. That's very much on the forefront of our minds because it's worsening in California year after year. I think we continue to break temperature extremes and records continually of like the hottest July on record, the hottest August on record, sort of continue to um, happen. And uh, I think for a long time, especially in the Bay Area, it's something that our communities weren't necessarily, it wasn't on the forefront of their minds, but now more so than ever, it is, because even in a more temperate climate like the Bay Area, that is generally, you know, not as extreme, we're seeing um, warmer seasons and hotter temperatures in a way that's unprecedented. And the issue in the Bay Area, while in some areas it's even more sort of imminent and acute, like the Central Valley in Los Angeles, where it's something that is needing immediate relief. The issues in the Bay Area, there's immediate need, partly because our communities aren't accustomed or equipped with this heat. We're not used to sort of seeing temperatures as high as we have during the summers. And our home, most of us live in older homes that don't have fans, let alone air conditioning. And so we're just like institutionally, structurally not equipped in our neighborhoods to respond when it gets that hot. People are buying, you know, cooling devices or fans and things, but those types of individual solutions also worsen the divide between people that can afford that and order that quickly when it's hot, and then those who can't. And so that's why, in part, we've been pushing for both like community resilience hubs as well as these housing investments, because we're not prepared at all as a region in the Bay Area. And I think that's probably true for the state, but it's like a unique context here because we really hadn't anticipated this to impact us in the way it has.
Yeah, thank you, Ami. And there's another question from Leslie Brizuela that I think you kind of answered already with that, but I'll go ahead and uplift it because I think it's maybe there's more detail you'd like to add. In recent news, there's been reports of elderly and disabled Californians passing away from extreme heat conditions in their homes or at bus stops. What do you think is something we should consider when getting these folks relief when they have difficulty traveling into cooling centers?
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. And I think one we really have to spotlight because when that's why there's no one size fits all model, and community resilience hubs are exciting, but meet a specific set of needs. And we do need to invest in those services, those place-based institutions. But for our elderly and disabled folks, we can't, those are often the folks on the front lines that are being hit disproportionately and are, as mentioned, be the ones suffering and dying from extreme heat. And so in addition to investing in affordable housing, elderly housing, like where folks live in terms of technologies, the other key piece of that is the social sort of connection and outreach that I mentioned around home care workers, the role of the care in the economy of sort of just our care providers in general, whether that's public health nurses or folks that are working in elderly homes. Those workers are so critical, and we saw that with the pandemic, and I think we see that with extreme heat as well, that they're taking care of the folks that are most in need and that need that direct support and outreach. And so checking in on folks, especially elderly living alone, if they don't live in a group setting, because those are the folks that we see most impacted, we need to check on those folks. And New York has an interesting model. It's sort of like buddy system of ways to like people in neighborhoods being connected to each other, like paired with each other in some ways. So when it's really hot, they knock on that neighbor's door and make sure, like, are they okay? What do they need in terms of, you know, resources or services? So those are just some pieces. It's like infrastructure, but it's also just people checking in on each other when we're so disconnected, especially during the pandemic.
Yeah, and thank you, Gabi, for delivering that point and kind of reiterating the complexity of taking on these issues, right, and the importance of taking different approaches, right? The community resilience centers paired with, you know, healthy and resilient homes, right? It's just one way to approach it that I think we appreciate you for uplifting. It's 10:58, so I think I feel comfortable kind of coming to a close and just thanking Amee again for kind of presenting. Thank you everyone for your time and for kind of jumping on to listen. I'll hand it back to Lawrence or Ashley to see if there's any closing remarks beyond that, but thank you so much, everyone. Lawrence or Ashley, anything else, any housekeeping items?
Nothing, excuse me, nothing on my end, just thanks again, and hope to see you at our upcoming BDC Presents.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amee. See you next month.
Well.